All right, welcome everybody to the November Kentuckiana Developers, FileMaker Developers Group session. Today we have the team from Proof+Geist to talk to us all about OttoFMS. And with that, I'm just going to turn it over to you guys. So it's all yours.
All right. Well, I think I'm going to get started just with a um, mm, maybe a background on why Otto exists. So let me share part of my screen here. Well, get this queued up, something like that. Everybody can see that okay? We good? All right. Let me also position the window so if there's anybody who's asking questions or whatnot, I can get to it. All right. So I just want to lay out why sort of what OttoFMS is all about, or why do we make it? And this is something that we've been building now in one form or another for um, 6 or 7 years, and it goes back even farther than that. It started with an idea that um, well, let me go back up a little bit. So in the old days of FileMaker development, which many of you know, you were all there. We had basically a FileMaker server in an office. And everything about the FileMaker database system that you were working on, all the data that was shown to the users was all put in and entered for the most part by people in that office within the confines of that physical building, because in many cases, there wasn't even internet connections, or if they were modem connections or some other very slow type connection. So this was in the era of local area network. But as you all know, we've moved on to a new model where it's something more like this, or at least even if you've got your FileMaker server in-house, you certainly have an internet connection, and it's probably broadband at this point. Um, and in like in my case, I have 2 GB in both directions, and it's not even expensive. And if I wanted to, I could get to 7 GB in both directions at my house, which is like insane. So we live in a different world, which is highly connected. And when this started to happen and become obvious that um, being connected, being part of the internet was really important, I began to think of what really needed, what FileMaker server needed to be, what it needed to have for it to fit really well into this internet ecosystem, right? And so we're talking about integrations between other apps or custom web apps. What if FileMaker Server really need to have part of it to like be on the server, on the box, so that you could make building integrations with other apps really easy, or building custom web apps really easy. And then the other thing we got with the advent of the FileMaker, even before this, the admin API, we wrote an API that used the FMS admin command line tool to do a bunch of automations on the FileMaker server. That sort of term is now called DevOps. And in fact, the first name of Otto, before it was Otto, and now it's OttoFMS, but it was originally FMS DevOps. And the whole idea was there's a bunch of stuff that we want to automate on the server, and we need something living on the server that can do that. And then we got uh, the DMT, the database migration tool, which allowed us to automate the moving data from a set of production files into a new set of development files. So now we could do this really cool thing where we could have a dev server and we could have a production server. And now we had to do, okay, where we can do our development on a dev server, and we want to be able to migrate that data from the dev server to the production server so that we're not impacting the production server with sort of live updates to the database system. Live updates have always been one of these things that's a real double-edged sword. Like, it's really nice that you can just go in and fix the files in production. And it's also really easy to completely take down the system. And I had this, excuse me, I had this drilled into my head at one point in the early 90s when we were back in this environment and we were out at a company that made custom glass tile for like bathrooms and things. And they had 30 salespeople that were on the phone all day long taking orders. And the entire system, the entire ERP was built in FileMaker. And we were doing development on the live system and we took it down. And the entire factory and all of the salespeople could not work for that entire day while we recovered that system, right? While we got it back up and running. And that was a few $100,000 in lost business for that business because of that. So, that's not always the case with our FileMaker systems. They're not always that risky. They're not always have that kind of downside if something goes down. But if it is, it's certainly nice to be able to do this kind of develop on dev. You can do even a staging server and test all your stuff and then move it to production. And to do all this, to make all of this work, you need a bunch of stuff that lives on the FileMaker server itself. And that is what OttoFMS is. It is the piece that runs on the server that makes DevOps, automated DevOps possible, that makes deployments and migrations possible, that makes integrations with other applications through webhooks and other means and custom web apps, making all of that easier. And that's what OttoFMS is. So we started that originally and we charged a price for it. And we did okay. We pretty happy with the results financially, but we also got frustrated when we wanted to do our custom dev work with our customers. They really just didn't want to spend the money for something they didn't really understand. They didn't really understand why we needed to do all this stuff. And we just decided that this product was one of those things that people needed to experience. They needed to just deploy it by default on every server they worked on. And eventually, the whole community would get the benefit of having these new ways of building applications faster and safer. And so that's what we did with OttoFMS, which we released now, I guess a little over a year ago. And it is free. So you can install it for free on any server. We do not charge for it at all. And as a result, it's now running on, I don't actually know what the last counts are, but a couple thousand servers has been installed on, and we know it's running and doing things like people are doing deployments on migrations on hundreds of servers. And as an example, we know that somewhere between 5,000 and 8,000 FileMaker files are deployed every month using OttoFMS around the world. So that's a pretty big number. We have people with vertical market solutions that one guy that I always use as an example, he's got 900 files in his, so he has a bunch of customers. He's got, I think, 13 servers, and he deploys, I'm not sure the number of copies of his solution to his 13 servers, but overall it's 900 files. This used to take him a month to do manually. He now does it on a Saturday morning because he has OttoFMS on his server. So that's really why it exists and why it's free. We just think that this is such an important part of how to develop and create value with the FileMaker platform that we just thought it needed to be out there and be available for everybody to use. And we just thought that, people would appreciate it, and eventually enough of them would come to us for advanced help or custom development, FileMaker or web apps or whatever, that it would more than pay for the amount of money we were making with Otto version 3. And I believe that's already true. So we're doing better with a free model here with OttoFMS than we were by trying to convince people they needed to pay $400 to $1,000, or some people were paying $3,000 a year if they had 25 servers, something like that. So that's the story behind OttoFMS and why it's free and why we just want to make it available, and why we just really hope that everybody will download it and try it on their servers, and to sort of tell you and show you more about and actually say also that AutoFMS is just like the foundational piece to the whole ecosystem, which which we call the automatic platform, which is a hosting platform that you can pay us to host your servers for you, or you can run your own servers and you can run AutoFMS on your own servers, but you can still connect it up to our cloud platform, which we're going to see a little bit of, I think, a little bit later. And you can get the benefits of our cloud platform for organizing and managing your multiple servers. And you don't have to pay us anything for that. You only have to pay us when you're hosting or buying services from us that, things like cloud servers, like or extra object storage or things like that. But otherwise, the automatic platform, which is AutoFMS, OttoDeploy, and and the Automatic Cloud Console, is free. So that's all I'm going to say. I might have a few other things to pop in here or there, but I'm going to turn it over to Kyle and Eric. And Kyle is we call it his everybody at the company has some kind of nickname, and so Kyle's nickname is Build Engineer Number One, because his first job was to build Otto and get it to where it's fully automated and we can deploy it, we can build it and ship it to, I don't know, we have five operating systems or something like that we have to support. And so Kyle's first big job was to do that, but now he is responsible for most of the work that goes on with AutoFMS and AutoDeploy. And Eric has also put a lot of work into AutoDeploy and AutoFMS. So the two of them are going to take you through some of the features at a lower level. I'll turn it over to them. Thanks very much. Well, actually, before I do that, let me just stop. It's a good point to ask if there's any questions about that part, or should we just move on to the demos?
Yeah, I have a question. I was wondering, can you also use it to sort of split development into, okay, now I have a core FileMaker Pro solution, and now I have version A for client A and version B for client B. And as much as I can, I develop in the sort of like the parent. You think about single inheritance, you got a parent and you got child classes. So I'm going to do as much development as possible in the parent class and then push it out to the children. And or I have a dev lag that I push up to the parent and then I push down to the other ones. And I'm thinking more here about really splitting the data from the actual database itself, the application with that. Can it do that?
So Otto can manage pretty much any kind of deployment strategy that you want in terms of like moving files around and doing data migrations or not. But if the simplest model that people do with this is they ship the same version to all their customers.
Okay.
And that it works very well. But if you have very important, the data migration tool does not merge or patch FileMaker files. It replaces them
right
with so if your dev version, you move it to a new customer, it is going to replace the customer's files and move the data from the customer's files into those new clones. So it's not a merging or a patching operation. There's no way to do that. That is technically impossible today with FileMaker. So the closest you're going to be able to get is something where you might have one file that's custom for each of your customers. And if you're very careful and you don't use file authorizations, then you can use this to manage that kind of stuff as well.
Okay.
So we got very technical there, but that's good to get that one out of the way. All right. Unless there's anything else, I'll turn it over to Kyle and Eric.
Hello, everybody. I'm Kyle. Let me share my screen. I will also warn you, I'm at my parents' house for Thanksgiving, and there are a lot of dogs. So if you hear any barking, that's what's going on. Can you see my screen and everything on it? Cool.
Yes, we can.
We'll hop through a couple. So I'm Kyle. I'm primarily a web developer. Not even primarily, I am a web developer. I do a very, very, very small amount of FileMaker sometimes. usually when I'm doing stuff on OttoDeploy. I'm also the, I guess, primary maintainer of OttoFMS. I run the build process, like Todd mentioned. I run all the tests. I do most of the development these days. I also work on OttoDeploy and the Automatic Cloud Console, as well as a few of our other internal projects. I live in Phoenix, Arizona, although I am currently in Atlanta, Georgia, where my parents live. With me is Eric. Eric, do you want to speak about yourself?
Sure. So I recognize a few of your faces here as well. So maybe you know me as well. But I started my software development career as a FileMaker dev. My first FileMaker version was FileMaker 14, so I don't go quite as far back as some of you. But that's how I started in this, and now I primarily work on web development projects that integrate with FileMaker, or sometimes not. Just depends on the use cases. As Kyle said, I also contributed to OttoFMS and OttoDeploy, and I work on lots of other services and digital products here at Proof+Geist.
Excellent. And then, you all know Todd. So the Geist, the CTO, creator of OttoFMS, and all associated things in the vision. And we talked about why build it. There's a better developer experience. There's a lot of complex functionality that OttoFMS enables by being on your server. This is all the stuff Todd kind of talked about. And OttoFMS also drives the ability to do like a lot of the software development best practices that the wider software development community uses that haven't maybe gotten into the FileMaker community just because there isn't really support for them. So like multi-environment development is much more difficult to do with FileMaker than it is with like a web project or something that's running on, GitHub branches. But with something like OttoFMS, you can kind of split it out into separate environments and make that really easy. It also really makes integrations easy, as Todd discussed, and we'll get into that in a second. We already talked about why it's free, so I will skip past this. A quick overview of some of the features of AutoFMS. We're going to dive into each one of these a little bit more, but just to give you a direction of where we're going. So kind of the flagship feature is deployments. Deployments are essentially moving files around. So taking a file from one server to another server, taking a file from one server and doing a migration, taking a set of 8 files and moving them to a server and then replacing them with files from a different server. There's a bunch of complex deployment things. Deployments also support restoring from FileMaker backups. They support restoring from offsite backups, deploying from URLs. The number of things that deployments support continue to increase every year, every month. And next week there's going to be even more, because you guys get a bit of a sneak peek. Actually, the demo servers that I'm going to be showing you are on a version of AutoFMS that is not yet released, so you get some very exciting sneak peek into new features. Kind of the other fun ones. So we have API proxies. So AutoFMS exposes API keys for the data API and the admin API for FileMaker. So this lets you, instead of having to do all of the token management and everything of those APIs, you can instead create a key in AutoFMS, and AutoFMS will handle all of the token management and everything. So you just say, hit the API with this API key. You just add /auto to the front of the endpoint, and it will do all the token management and send you back the results.
Yeah. And those API keys are also revocable, so you can provide they effectively replace your username and password, but you can use them without sharing your actual username and password to the server, for example. So it's another benefit of them. I'll talk about webhooks as well. So webhooks, we might even, some of these things we'll get into a demo or later if you want. We'll kind of play it by ear if you have questions about any of these as we dive deeper. But webhooks are just a really easy way for Otto to integrate with these other services. So a lot of services you've probably seen, like say a form platform, whenever you submit a new form entry, it can send a webhook somewhere, and Otto gives you a URL that you can give to that service, and then very easily receive that data directly into your FileMaker file and immediately run a script when it receives it too. So you can process that data from mostly forms, but there's all kinds of other integrations that webhooks are enabled.
Yeah, definitely. Otto also has offsite backups. So, you have your FileMaker server, you're running backups of all your files, and you need a way to get those backups off of your server in case your server like catches on fire or something horrible, or just the disk gets corrupted and you lose everything. So Otto supports S3 compatible object storage, and you can set up schedules that will back up certain sets of files and send them to offsite storage locations. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit, but you can send them to offsites and restore from them. So we also have, go ahead.
On that subject, I have a setting up a secondary server as a failover. Would that help support getting the data there initially?
Getting the data there, offsite backups would not help with, but getting the data there initially, OttoFMS deployments would help a lot with, because you can send all your files over pretty simply.
Yeah, this offsite back, we think about backups as just having a just an extra drive that's attached to your server where your backups are stored. But offsite backups let you put them in, say, an S3 bucket that are completely separate from your server, and you just push them out there. It's, it would be like burning your backups of your photos to a CD and keeping it somewhere safe that's completely separate from your actual computer.
Yeah. And then we have some like FileMaker server management UI stuff that's pretty nice that I'll show you in the OttoFMS console. And this next slide is about deployments, which we already talked about a little bit, but can do data migrations, file transfers, restoring from backups, deploying from offsite storage, all this stuff. So, but I'm going to take you through a little bit of a demo so that we can look at this stuff instead of theorycrafting about it. So this is the OttoFMS console.
Hey, let me just interrupt real quick. Sorry. I just thought of a way in which we might be able to help with failovers a little bit. So Kyle, when you get to if we get to where you can actually have a build that, actually, I don't know. Do we have this feature where the build will actually push to the other server?
Yeah.
Yeah, we do. So in theory, we could do that. So yeah, but the problem is that they are going to, when you make copies of files and send them somewhere, it does take resources on the server. So you have to be aware of that.
Yeah, I was looking for a one-time situation because we're going to end up mirror syncing the two servers to keep the data in sync. They're both going to be live.
Yeah, one time, and I've used that exact use case where we use these features to just push a whole set of files to the other server.
And we just have a brand new feature in OCC, which makes this like
that too.
Drop dead simple.
Yeah, I'll show that off a little bit later too, because that's pretty nice. So, so I guess before we really dive into the OttoFMS console, I think it's easy. The way my mental model for AutoFMS works is that AutoFMS is essentially an API server that's bolted onto the side of your FileMaker server. It's a node application that runs on your server and accepts API calls and also presents you with this console, which you can use for a variety of things. But everything else that you're going to see that's not the AutoFMS console is running through the AutoFMS API. You can use the AutoFMS API. It is open and public. There's documentation for it. And if you're in the console here, you can just click up here and open up the AutoFMS API. And this is the entire API documentation. So you can set up APIs to start and stop the admin server processes. You can change settings. You can run builds and deployments, and you can do the admin API keys and all this stuff. And we also have docs for AutoFMS, which are at docs.autofms.com. And this, if you have any specific questions about things that you don't get answered today, this is a great resource. I will also call out that we have a community you can go to if you have any questions, which is at community.automatic.cloud, I believe. And that's basically a community forum. You can ask as many questions as you want. People are super great there. I get Slack notifications every time someone posts something there, so I will also see it. Yes, so there's lots of great resources for learning and for figuring out what's going on and all that kind of thing. This is a web application, so it's kind of, it's got some fun little bells and whistles. You can do dark mode and light mode, and there's like a search, there's a command K bar, which you can do quick search and stuff. I won't go too much into those things, but this is the dashboard. It has some basic statistics about the deployments you've run. You can see on this server, I've run 118 deployments, totaling 158 gigabytes, and I have 42 databases. And, you can see some basic information here, as well as about webhooks and all the data you've received there. I don't use many webhooks on this server. This is the deployments tab here is basically a log of your deployments. I'm going to talk a little bit more about what deployments do and how they work when we dive into OttoDeploy after I talk about the console a bit, because OttoDeploy really will show you like the nuts and bolts of what's going on. But here is where you would come if you need to do like log viewing so that you can see all of your logs here and the build logs for everything. Another cool feature OttoFMS has is the file browser. So this is essentially a browser for your file system on your server. We've exposed a couple of the kind of important folders for you. So you can access your FileMaker backups, and you can hop in here. You can, if I have backups on this server, there. You can hop into your databases. You can say, oh, I need my Foxtail demo file from this backup, and then you can just download this file right here. Or since this is a backup, you can restore it. And if I restore it, it like runs a deployment and reinstates this backup file right from here without having to do any downloading and uploading or even connecting to my server via FTP or anything. You can just
this is a full-featured file explorer. So you can upload files, download files, make new folders, anything that you would expect to be able to do just from a web browser.
Yeah. Yep. It does also give you access to some of the basic FileMaker folders. You can also access your live database folders. It doesn't let you do anything with your live databases in these folders because they're live. But if you need to access like the remove by FileMaker folder from here, you can go in here and look at all your removed files and delete them and manage them and all that kind of thing. I have a lot of removed files on this server because this is one of our test servers. And then there's some OttoFMS folders this exposes. So these are kind of, they're useful if you need to do anything with them, but usually you won't really need to touch them. And I think Eric was going to talk a little bit about API keys. We glanced on them a bit earlier, but.
Yeah, so data API keys and admin API keys are on here too. If you scroll down, we've just got a lot of them here. I like to think of them as a replacement for your credentials. So for data API keys, this would be for a replacement for FileMaker file credentials. So you can create a data API key, you enter your username and password, and it will return back to you a token instead that you can revoke or copy. We use this a lot for our web applications. This is one of my favorite features of OttoFMS because in Otto 3, you had to use the API to create them. And now it's just super easy to do it from here. So I don't know what else there is to say about that, though. So
let me just say one thing about it. So if you use the REST API, the FMDAPI data API, or you use the admin API, it does this thing where you have to log in and get a token, and that token is only good for a certain period of time.
Yep.
And then you have to if it's not used within 15 minutes, it expires and you need to get a new one. So
using the original credentials.
Using the original credentials, which is that makes it a real problem or just more difficult if you want to build a web page, for example, that accesses the FileMaker data. You have to take care of that refreshing and managing that key and making sure that token is kept up to date. Or if you wanted to give this to a third-party application that was, say, sending webhooks, you don't have to give the file credentials to something else, to some other entity that's not you. So you maintain control of the file credentials while allowing the kind of access that you want into the FileMaker database. So this is part of that thing of like, okay, there's all these services and systems out here, and our customers need to integrate with those. How do we make that as simple as possible? And so one of the ways is let's get rid of this sort of not secure practice of giving credentials to a file to a third party to access this system. Let's give them an API key, which we can then revoke at any time if that for whatever reason. That's much more secure than saying, here's my full access password to the file. Go ahead and do what you need to do with it, right? So you can certainly do that if you know how to write all that code and do it. But again, it's just one of those things. It's like, let's just have this on the server and let the server manage the process of doing API keys, which if you've done any integrations with other systems, you probably are pretty familiar with what an API key is. And anybody that you might want to, let's say you want to hire a web developer to build a system on top of your FileMaker database, they're going to understand what API keys. And they're going to appreciate just having this layer there and not having to build it and not having to
Yeah.
build it for that particular app that you're asking them to do.
The way
And it's the same thing
reason
for
I
the
say,
for the admin API as well.
right. The reason I say that it's like a replacement for your credentials is because behind the scenes, that is what it's doing, which means that whatever credentials you give it are the access privileges that that API key will have. So if you want to make a locked down user account that can only access certain layouts or certain records or whatever, any of that, that's all still intact here, which is really cool.
Yeah. It still uses all the same FileMaker authentication, which is nice.
So that's something that could be used with the data API, for instance, for our kyfmp.com website.
Yes. Yes.
Mhm.
Instead of
Yeah, so the data
storing
API
it.
keys are for the data API, the admin API keys are for the FMS admin API, and the admin API keys are also used for the OttoFMS API that Kyle mentioned at the beginning. If you want to interact with any of Otto specific
Yeah.
features or FileMaker Server admin API features.
Yeah. So Ron, this is really built for exactly what you're trying to do. You want to make a custom integration with your WordPress site to your FileMaker database. You shouldn't have to manage tokens. It's a pain in the butt.
Yeah. And
This
even
just
though we have
removes
libraries
that.
that do it, those libraries don't work as well on, say, serverless environments. If you've got a Lambda function that stores that token in memory, then that Lambda function goes away. That was another problem that we ran into. And so API keys solve that as well, because the token is longer lived and the token refresh happens on Otto itself.
Yeah, so there's no latency. Like normally if you had to do a token refresh from say your WordPress site, you're gonna have to do like three extra requests to do that. And you're gonna whatever the latency between your WordPress site and your FileMaker server, it's gonna have to do
Back and
that.
forth.
But it's all running on the server, so the token refreshes are essentially instant. There's no latency and when the token refresh happens, because it all happens on the server, it's stored in a SQLite database and it's encrypted and it's
Yeah,
just
that's definitely been
fast.
one of the challenges is
Yeah.
token management, and then making sure that, as somebody refreshes a page or goes from page to page, they're using the same connection instead of having to reacquire a new token every time.
That's right.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. And this handles all of that.
okay, I'm definitely going to have to do some
Yeah.
research. Okay.
I will
Yeah.
also, maybe this is too deep into the weeds, but I'll say that, you can have multiple API keys for each user as well. So if that's a use case you need, we've done those kinds of supported things, where you can still have a user log in using their credentials, and then you can give them a long-lived API token that still keeps them logged in as them. And then in FileMaker, for all the records you're doing, you can still use things like get account name, and it will return the account name of that API key, right? Which in our examples, they're all like admin or whatever, but you can do individual ones as well.
Right.
Mhm.
Super,
And that's why
super
it's part of the
useful
API.
super useful for offline FileMaker Go applications
Yep.
where you want to use the data API to exchange data with the data on the server. They can log in with their credentials. They get back an API key that's stored in their FileMaker file. As long as that API key is valid, they have access, right? And so, and then if you want to revoke it, you can revoke it, and then they don't have access. So, again, it just sort of it's not like this is particularly challenging to do if you know how to write the code, but like we want to do this all the time, right? And so, what a lot of this came from was we used to write Node API servers for like every project that we needed to do that would be specific for that project and run on that server for that server. And what we tried to do is just rip out all the stuff that was the hard parts of that and just put it on the server. So that part of the project is never needed to, you never need to worry about that anymore. You can just use the primitives that OttoFMS gives you to get a jump start on those types of activities.
Like, are you saying I could avoid managing all my API keys within my application?
Yeah, you don't have to manage the tokens in your web apps or your FileMaker Go apps or whatever other applications are connecting to your database through the data API or the admin API for that. You get it, you request an API key instead, and you use that API key as the authentication method, and all of the session management is handled by Otto. Takes care of it.
So if I understand this correctly, being able to use a data API key is a function that Otto provides. That's not
Yes.
built into the data API
Yes.
or anything else. Okay.
Yeah, so we put a proxy in front.
Mhm.
We listen on a slightly different path.
Yeah, you'll
As
see
you're
here,
seeing
it's
right
like
there, it's
just add
showing like,
/auto to the front of your data API call.
yeah. So it's very similar. I use the data API normally, except you change the auth method, and you change the path slightly. And it's just doing a pass through. Like it doesn't even load the request into memory. It just, as the request comes streaming in to Otto, it just looks up it looks up the token in the database, uses it and adds it to the request and streams it on. And it will stream the response back as well.
Yeah, and if the token is expired, it handles all the refreshing and everything for you.
That's fantastic. I can't wait to dive into that.
And yeah, you all saw me make an API key. It took me 10 seconds. And then the path is like you add /auto, and then the authentication is a bearer token or as a query parameter or as basic auth. So it works for really any situation you would need. And then it just works. So anywho, we have a lot to get through. So let's continue onwards.
You can get lost in that. You can get lost in any one of the features we have here. They're very, very deep.
Very in depth. Yes, yes.
Webhooks are a very similar feature, but not quite the same.
Did you want me to talk about those as well, or?
Yeah, take it away.
Okay. So webhooks are, I know I mentioned them earlier, and the way I like to think about them is that they are a simple integration to the data API without you having to really write any data API calls, right? So they use a data API key, just like we talked about, and you can register a webhook. You can say, I want to go to this file, and you pick an API key that it works. It kind of walks you through it here, and you give it a channel, which just kind of identifies this webhook from any other webhook sent to the same file. And now all of a sudden you have a URL that you can just give to any application or integration that wants a webhook, and it will pass it through. It will create a record in the FileMaker file. So in this case, the test_API.fmp12 file, it'll create a record there, and it will run a script. And you can, in here, you can just test it. I don't know if we have that file open or anything, but it just sends data. You send any kind of data to it, and it parses it and sends it right through to your FileMaker file. All of that's using the data API.
Yeah. So who's used webhooks in other systems? Everybody seen that before?
Taylor,
like,
yes.
I mean, things like QuickBooks, and this is going to be a big part of the integration training day that I do. Webhooks are extremely common. Most established web apps will have the ability to say, like, if you take QuickBooks, when a customer changes, send the customer data to this URL. And again, in the old days, we used to build a custom web server to do that, and we would take the payload and we would call the data API, and then it was just like, let's just build that into the server so you can just get a URL. So now, if I'm doing this with QuickBooks, QuickBooks says, give me a URL. I come here, I create a URL, I give it to QuickBooks, and QuickBooks will just start sending me the data changes every time a customer, an invoice, whatever I register it for. It'll send that data to my FileMaker file. Right? Really powerful, because now you can, without having to write any custom code, you now have integration between any app that can use a webhook and your FileMaker system.
Yeah, this sure beats doing have a whole bunch of schedule scripts that keep calling once an hour or once,
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And it does rely on the integration to support webhooks, because there are integrations that they have an API that you can get data out of their system, but they don't necessarily support webhooks, which is then pushing data to you. So that's still going to be an issue. It's not like but QuickBooks, as an example, they do support webhooks, and a lot of services do. I mentioned Forms as like a great one, and I know there's lots of any WordPress form builder, for example, on your website will have, hey, when a new form submission comes in on your website, where do you want to send the data? And one of those options is a webhook, which means it can go right to your FileMaker file, and then it can, and not just create a record in your FileMaker database, you have a log of it, but it'll run a script. You can do any action you want because of that submission.
Any action with the data that gets sent in. Again, with WordPress, there's a plugin called, I think it's called WordPress Webhook Pro or something like that. And it basically will let you register a webhook for any event in WordPress. Anytime a new user signs up, anytime a user logs in, it integrates with all the shopping carts. So If you got WooCommerce, anytime there's a WooCommerce order, it'll just post it out to your FileMaker database.
Yeah. I will also, so Todd mentioned earlier about the offline FM Go apps. We have a part of one of our service team members, Aloe, has a blog post about an offline app that she worked on with one of our customers. And the way that they're getting the data from the offline app back to the main FileMaker database is OttoFMS webhooks. So if you want to read more about fun use cases, that's a good blog post to go take a look at too.
Because it's a really easy way to send data from another FileMaker file, right? Because it's just posting to a URL.
Yeah, and you can use it for file uploads too. So you can upload files using like a multi-part form data MIME type, which will get saved off to the FileMaker documents folder, and then it will pass the file path along to the script that's getting called. So then you can use the file math and do whatever you need to do with the files in FileMaker.
And the reason why that's important, I'll just quickly say, is that if you upload container data to the data API, there's just a lot of hoops you have to jump through, and it can be very slow. And so by auto accepting the file directly to the server, it doesn't like that part of uploading the file. There's no other services involved. It's a very simple process that just posts it right to the documents directory. And then from your FileMaker server, you can choose to take that file path that's included and put it in a container or not, right? Or whatever you want to do with it, right? So it makes uploads, file uploads very easy to work with.
And I will also, so the channel that you saw when we were registering these webhooks, webhooks is when they get called, they call a script in your FileMaker file that passes along whatever JSON data gets sent along with it. You can just immediately store it, or you can do something with it. But the channel, you can make multiple webhooks with different channels, and then you can basically make your receiving script branch based off of those channels. So you can have one file do 20 different webhooks with 20 different things that they do, that fire off data changes and application updates and whatever you need in your file. So they're very flexible. And there's some cool stuff you can do with them. So
we have systems out there receiving tens of thousands of webhooks a day.
Yeah, I think the last time I looked at OttoFMS sends back some usage statistics, which is how we're getting these numbers. And it's very basic. There's no file names or anything. It's just like file sizes and counts of things. The last time I looked, I think it was like in the last month, like 100 servers have used webhooks, and they've sent like 300,000 webhooks or received 300,000 webhooks in a month. So they handle scale pretty well. They're very fast. You can also register them automatically. So if you send a request to the correct path, so it's like /auto/receiver/database name/channel, it will just register a webhook for you and send it along to your auto receiver script. So you don't have to come in here and manually do all the registration. You can just update your script and it will get handled. Or if you have like a channel that's kind of dynamic, you can use the script to handle that, and it'll register them automatically. So you don't have to come in here and register each one manually. But very cool feature, webhooks. Lots of interesting use cases. If you need more, and if you need more complex use cases, Simple Queue is also free and does like pub sub type notification webhook systems. So also very cool and works with OttoFMS webhooks. But onwards. So the next thing is this FileMaker Server tab. You saw me hop into it earlier. This is probably pretty familiar looking. It's FileMaker database management. So this is just a list of all my databases on the server. You can see it gives me sizes and client counts, and there's a few columns that I've hidden so I can see like the folder and the subfolder that it's stored in, as well as like the privilege sets that are set up on it. So there's some cool stuff you can see there. This is also like, this table is just kind of cool. So you can like group stuff. You can say, oh, show me all my normal files. You can filter everything. There's some very like, this table it's a very fully featured table. You can sort by file, you can sort by status, you can say, show me all my largest files on this server. And then each file has, and you can search. Yeah, so you saw me search earlier, right? You can say, show me all my files that have the word test in them somewhere. It'll say, oh, these ones are in the KBD test subfolder. These ones, I have a bunch of files called test API because I just have this one file I keep duplicating to test with.
If you can't tell, Kyle's good at testing things.
I do a lot of testing.
He's
Um,
bragging about tests just earlier today.
I ran the new version of AutoFMS, like it has 462 tests that all were passing this morning. I was very excited. Um, each one of these files also has a bunch of stuff you can do with it. So you can open and close files, you can pause them, you can download files. So this file is open, but I can download it right from here. It will like run a FileMaker backup and then send the file along for you. So it doesn't have really any impact on the live file. You can also do the same thing with a clone. You can rename files. So this does some cool stuff. You can just put in a new file name and I can say, make this the test demo file. I should make this match each other. And you know what? I want to make this a duplicate of this file, so copy it and put it in this new. This is okay. I should also call out this stuff I'm doing right now with the copy file and the subfolder and everything. This is new.
This looks new. Yeah.
That comes out. That comes out next week. And I can say, we'll call it that. We'll create a new subfolder in my default databases folder, and we'll copy my container data over. Why not? And I'll press rename, and it'll like close this file and first it'll yell at me because I have the file open. It'll like close the file. It'll copy it to a new directory. It'll copy over any external container data I have, and then it'll reopen them both. And this takes like, I don't know, 20, 30 seconds maybe. But, I just made a copy of that file. I didn't have to download anything. I didn't have to upload anything. I didn't have to go manage all the container data myself. So also kind of a fun thing. You can also upload FileMaker files here. You can close and delete them. There's some integrations with the FileMaker developer tool, so you can create XMLs of files right from here and download them. You can encrypt and decrypt files from here if you have the encryption keys and the passwords. A bunch of stuff in here, as well as
I'm forgetting at what place we've shipped some of these, but
yeah.
Importantly on the rename thing, this is using the developer utility to keep the external file references in check.
Yeah, if you try to rename multiple
Yes.
files, so you can rename multiple files at the same time and you can just manually decide them. But you can also use the FM developer tool. This is also new and not actually released yet. But I can say, take my set of files called test API and test demo and name them replace the word test with new. And this is my username and password, and put it in my KBD test subfolder, copy my container data. And this will use the FM developer tool to do this instead. So if you have a set of 5 files that all have external file references to each other, the FM developer tool will rename them and also update all those external file references so nothing gets broken.
Isn't that awesome? If you've been doing FileMaker development for a long time with multiple file systems, if you want to make a copy of those just to like do a little extra work and test some things out, that's download the files, run it to the developer tool, upload the files, blah, blah, blah. Now it's just a few button clicks and you have a new copy of the system and all the external file references are intact. So the system will work correctly. Very excited to get this feature finally shipped.
Yeah.
Yeah. This whole tab, it's almost like underrated, but if you think about it, it's FileMaker Admin Console plus, right? Especially this
Very
week.
much so.
I especially love the uploading files, right? Because now I can upload a FileMaker file without even opening FileMaker.
Yeah.
Because it's all through your browser.
Yeah, we don't use the FileMaker upload anymore. We just use OttoFMS to upload files.
Yeah. So for, I guess, another quick thing, if I wanted to let me clear my selection here. I have a bunch of these files called template on here. I wanted to just find all my template files and I wanted to say, take all these files, I need to close them. They're closed. That was it. It's done. I can open them. Now they're open. Or they will be in about 2 seconds. There we go.
There they go. Opening.
That's nice UI.
Yeah, you can just multi-select, do whatever you want. If I need to somebody added a bunch of these files on here, which I don't care about, let me close these, and then they'll all close, and I can be like, okay, now delete them. And this will just delete all of them. It'll send them all to the Remove by FileMaker folder. And you'll be done. You don't have to FTP in, you don't have to do anything like that. You can just really quickly select, close, delete, done.
And I'm sure you're getting to
I-
this, but it's very similar with like disconnecting clients in the next tab,
Yes.
right? You're gonna have a
Yeah,
very
yeah.
similar experience of just quickly disconnect
if I-
everybody. Yeah.
This is not capitalized.
By
That's
the
my
way,
favorite
that's
thing
another
to
thing
do,
you just
kick everyone
did.
off
It's
your
so
server.
cool that you just ran by it without even anybody noticing, but you can just click these little quick launch links to open in FileMaker Pro.
Yeah, or copy an FMP link URL if you need to send them a link to your file, or if you need to put a file link that only accepts HTTPS URLs, you can do that. Some very cool stuff.
Can we touch on that for a second too? Because that's another one of my favorite features that I don't think people
We're never going to
understand.
get to the deployment feature.
We're never, I know. But so I don't know if anyone's ever experienced this, but especially when we work in a team, we have like documentation, say Google Docs, or we use 1Password, for example. And so I would store credentials in 1Password and I can put a link there. But if I put an FMP URL, 1Password will just think of that as text and it won't actually launch the URL. So we've built a redirect mechanism so that you can copy an HTTPS URL and then anything that thinks about links will just open it and it'll be kind of like a browser. It'll open a browser, which will open FileMaker. So you can just click to launch files. And when you're working with multiple files, that's an amazing feature to be able to just quickly get a URL to launch a file that you can store in, say, documentation.
Basically make it so that you can use FMP URLs, except use it with HTTPS.
Yeah. So some very cool stuff there too. Yeah, the opening, I use the open from here a lot. I actually almost always just open from here, except for my OttoDeploy file, because I always have opened that recently, so I can open it right from FileMaker Pro. But you can do client management here. So this is pretty simple messaging clients and disconnecting clients. You can open this up and say, hey, get out of here. And give them like 10 seconds to leave. And then disconnect them, and then
or just what I do is I don't put any message. I just click, and say disconnect immediately.
Yeah, that also works. So you can disconnect clients. You can do like managing of all clients here. So if I had like 15 clients, which I never do because it's just me on these servers, but if I did, you could message all of them simultaneously or disconnect them all, all that kind of thing. And this will show you, some basic information about them, like how many files they have open and where they are and all that kind of thing. So one of the fun things in here that I think is really cool is the services tab. So if you are having a problem with your FileMaker admin server and you need to restart it, usually what you have to do is you have to open up a terminal and you have to SSH into your server and you have to say, restart my admin server. You have to add a password. You have to wait for a second, and then you have to like refresh all your pages that have access to that, and then it will work. Otto is on your server, so it can run all of these commands. So right from the OttoFMS console, you can start, stop, and restart all of the FileMaker services. So I usually use this for the admin server because it's the main thing that causes me problems. But you can just like really quickly click restart here and just say, yes, restart my admin server. And then after a few seconds, it'll pop up a little thing.
Scripting engine's popular too. Yeah.
Yeah, and the scripting engine. And this will restart my admin server. And then it'll say, hey, this worked. Hooray. A fun little check mark or a little thumbs up. And that restarted my admin server. So if I've hit a problem where I'm hitting the like too many admin API sessions error, I can come in here, restart my server really quick, and then all of this get cleared out. And if I'm using Otto, it will just start making a new one because it just does that. You don't have to do any of the token management with the admin API. So it will recreate the new token and just keep working. If you were doing like the database server or something else, that would obviously do some other stuff, cause bigger things. But yes, this is a very fun tab, so very useful. One of the other fun things in the console is we have logs. So this has all of the FileMaker logs, including the ones that they don't show you in the FileMaker admin console, as well as all of the Otto logs. So one of the things we should call out, well, first of all, let's just look at them because they're very fun. So this is my logs. I have 34,000 lines of logs for this server in the AutoInfo log, and they're also searchable. So I can say, oh, show me log lines that have the word test in them. And you can see here I have 2,897 matches, and I can filter down to those, and it'll see I've made a lot of the same build called test copies and test clones. And I sent a backup to the same place like 300 times, and I have a build script test thing I run. Yeah. So this is very fun. You can kind of just search, filter. If you need to like look in your access logs for a certain IP address, you could just put the IP address in and then filter to it and see what they've done. Stuff like that. So super cool log viewer.
We think I still feel like the admin console, FileMaker Server admin console log viewer is not usable. It's gotten a little better recently, but it's still really hard to actually navigate around and use. So
yeah,
this one's what we use.
Yeah. And then of course you can, do a refresh if you need to check things. You can see here I restarted the admin server. You can, earlier when we ran that file rename, this is that, it's copying the files. So when I deleted that key earlier. So this will log a bunch of stuff. There's also debug logging, which I actually don't have turned on for the server, but it's like it's like the verbose version basically. So there's like, it logs extra things. And then if your log files are getting really big, so if you have like, I bet my event log is huge. Yeah, so this event log is 290,000 lines long. You can just like, if you're at a point where you're like, okay, I don't really need these anymore, you can just clear it right from here and it'll clear out your log file so that you can save space on your server, because this is probably like a 100 megabyte log file at this point. Or if you need to like send your logs into a different system to do some management, you can download the file right from here too. So this will just download the full file for you. Let you do all that kind of thing. The one other thing I should call out is this app info and app error at the bottom here. So this is an OttoFMS feature, and it lets you do logging from your FileMaker applications or from any application, I guess technically, but the intended use is for FileMaker applications. And it lets you use an AutoFMS API to log messages from your files. So you can hit a quick URL HTTP request from your FileMaker file, put a message in, give it some information and a level, and it'll log stuff for you. So these are just some test messages, but you can see like an unexpected error occur and warning message. So this is great if you have like scripts on the server that are running, like perform scripts on the server, and you need to like figure out what's going on in it, but you can't really debug it very well. You can log
users
things.
that use your FileMaker system and they don't tell you what's actually going on because they're not developers. Right. That's another good use for this.
Right. So you can log from inside your scripts, and you can log variables, and you can see what's happening, and you can kind of step through everything that's going on so that you can debug more effectively without having to actually go back in and perform the script and see what's happening manually. So
if you remember back to the days when we used to use a custom message to debug our scripts and step through and actually show message dialog to like step through a script and see what the data was at each step. This does this. Most people, probably the most popular feature is debugging server-side scripts, PSOS scripts, where you can't debug it. So how do you do that? If you don't have logs built into your system, you're stuck. So this kind of replaces a logging system for every file that's running on this server. You just have logs built in, basically.
Yeah. So, and this has an app info and an app error. The app error just shows the error level ones. So you can send this level and you can send it as like info warn or error. And if you send error, it shows up in the app error log. If you show info, it shows up in the info log. Error also shows up in the info log, so you can see everything at the same time. Somehow I have more information in the error log than the info log. I probably cleared it out at some point, but yeah. And then there's this settings tab at the bottom is somewhat innocuous, but it has a bunch of stuff hidden in it. So there's some basic things. So you can change the color. So that's pretty exciting. You can like make this pink instead, or you can make it blue.
If you ever have multiple FileMaker servers and you don't remember which one you're on because you forgot to look at the URL, you can give each one a different color.
Yeah, and this color will come into play more when we look at the Ottomatic Cloud Console in a second too. So, and you can change the color of the sidebar, and you can set a environment tag. So this is my development environment, so it's my development environment. But I could also, like, if I have a test environment, I could go in here and say, oh, this is my test environment, and I want my badge to be this nice green color. And then I have a new badge, and that shows up in AutoDeploy and the Ottomatic Cloud Console, and theoretically third parties could also show a similar thing because we send all the information along with the server info.
Yeah, well, this environment tag is even more powerful, I think, than you put on. If you with the override FileMaker server name turned on, what that
Yeah.
does is it enforces a consistent FileMaker or a consistent naming scheme for the get host name function from your FileMaker file. And so if you have that check turned on, it doesn't matter if you change the if someone goes into the admin console and changes the server name, Otto will change it back to include this prefix so that ensure that this is the dev server because Otto enforces it, right? And then we use custom functions to be able to run, oh, which server is this file running on? And you can very easily distinguish that.
There's only one way to get information about from inside a FileMaker file. There's only one way to get information about the server that it's running on, and that is the get host name function. So by having this, you can now use the get host name function to ensure that you're running on a dev server versus a blah, blah, blah production server versus whatever. And you can branch your code based on development or production kind of thing.
Yeah.
Jillian just asked a quick question about the limiting the size of logs. I don't think that is a feature.
No, we don't have that. We talked about, I had a version where I had log rotation built in, but I was a pain, got rid of it. But potentially it could come back at some point.
Yeah.
Where it would automatically rotate the logs and zip the old ones, but we don't have it now.
Yeah. In the version coming out next week, we are adding a new feature, which I'll show you in a second, which does do some like server file size management, but it is not the logs. So we talked earlier about offsite backups. So offsite backups support having multiple locations and multiple schedules. So if you have an S3 location you share with your customer and an S3 location you have for yourself, and your customer gets backups hourly and you get backups daily, you can set up separate locations. So each one of these is just an S3 location. So this is some AMS Vultr objects thing I have. And then you can set up multiple schedules for each one too. So when you add a new one here, you basically just enter your S3 credentials. So you have an endpoint, you have an access key, you have a secret. This stuff down here is not required, but can be useful depending on what you're doing. And then you can change the names and things, which is kind of fun. But the schedule, which is the fun one, so you can create a new schedule, and this creates a FileMaker backup schedule for you. And then you select a remote, and you select a bucket name. This bucket name doesn't let me list buckets, so usually this would have a little drop down, but sometimes if you don't have the permissions on that storage location, it won't let you. And then you can set up a remote folder path. So this is like, now this will show up when I back up these databases, it will show up on my offsite location in this KVD test bucket in a demo path in a DBs folder. But you can also use an existing schedule on your server. So if I wanted to just take my daily schedule and make it an offsite schedule, this would, every time my daily schedule runs now, it will just send the result of the daily schedule offsite.
And it's a copy. It's not going
to move it off your server. You don't have to do any extra work. You can just take,
yeah,
it's not going to move it off your server. It copies it. It syncs it up to S3 basically, or it copies it up to S3. But you don't have to do any extra work. You don't have to go make any new schedules. You can just take your existing backup setup with whatever files it's backing up and make them be offsite as well. It does it, and it will keep a longer history too. So if you only keep like 3 sets of backups on your server, your offsite backups can have as many as you want because space is cheaper in offsite backups, significantly cheaper normally. And you can keep them for longer. OttoFMS doesn't do any sort of lifecycle management for your offsites, so it will keep them forever unless you set up something to not keep them forever, like a lifecycle rule. But you can have a lot more backups available to you without having to sacrifice disk space on the server. You can also, if you're using external container data folders, you can include those. Those will just keep a single copy. So it'll keep the most recent copy of the container data whenever the schedule runs, but it'll back that up as well.
Now, is this for that does the offsite backup? Is it keeping complete copies each time, or is it something that does like incremental changes?
Whatever's defined by the schedule, right?
No, so it's incremental. Well, I'm sorry. Each file is pushed up as it is, right? It's based on the uniqueness of the file path. So every backup gets a new folder, and the files in that folder would be a new file. So it's going to go up entirely. It's not doing parts of the file.
Yeah, it's not going to like
And,
progressives or
and
anything.
that's what you want for your offsite backups. You do not want parts. You want the whole file. For the container data, it's a little different. It does not copy. It does not make a time-stamped copy of all your containers because that would be insanely resource intensive. So in that case, it's going to keep basically every file that's ever been stored in the container data. It'll only upload the new ones or the ones that have been changed.
Yeah.
As of the last time you ran it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And that's really the only way you wouldn't, if you had 10 gigs of container data or 20, I mean, we have people with 100 gigs of container data. You wouldn't want that copied every night as is. That would be insane. It would take forever. It would use up it would use up a lot of space and be very expensive. So the next best thing you can do is basically keep a copy of every file that's ever been uploaded.
So I have a couple of files that, aside from container data, are like closing 10 gigs per file. And I guess my concern or my thoughts are, how intense is that to move over a 10 gig file or two 10 gig files like once a day? Like, what kind of resources is that?
I mean,
yes, this
is a good question. Let me just answer this at a sort of a very high level. We are doing a lot more on the FileMaker servers. The primary problem that we see with people using really FileMaker servers in general, but along with OttoFMS, is they under-resource the server. Your FileMaker servers need to have the resources that they need, depending on the usage that's happening on them. And if you're going to be doing, you're going to have Otto on there, and you're going to be pushing massive backups, and you're going to be doing, massive deployments on a regular basis. You're going to need a bigger server. There's no free lunch here. We cannot escape the bounds of physics here, which is that if you're doing more things on the server, it's going to use up more resources. We do the best that we can to be as sensitive to the resources as we possibly can. But at the end of the day, if we're pushing bits around, it takes effort to push bits around. And there's just again, eventually you run into network performance and disk IO and things like that. So the faster your networks, the faster your disks, the better it's going to be. But yeah, you need a big server. Your production server should be big.
The other question I had about the offsite backups is, so in the event of a disaster and then you've rebuilt the server and you're ready to, can you then migrate the offsite backups onto the server from the S3?
Yes. So right now we haven't. So we're planning on putting the offsite backups into this console somehow. So right now you can't actually look at what's on your offsites without opening up some sort of S3 provider. We're planning on adding that. The API technically supports the ability to restore from those backups. So you can say, take this backup on offsite and restore it to my server. But there's no UI for it right now. So yes, it supports it. There's not a really simple way to do it yet. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Do you think that's something that's going to be coming at some point to?
Yeah, I have a Git branch for doing that already. So, yes. What was I going to say? Oh, I will also call out the software that we're using to send up the backups to the offsite storage is like industry standard, used across the world, like very, very robust. So it shouldn't be like too big of a load, but I would definitely, if you're backing up all of your files and it's over 10 gigs, I would probably do it at night. So, and yeah, this just sends up. So once the backup completes, it will send up all the output of that backup to offsite. So whatever backup schedule you have set up, every time one of those runs, it will send it to the offsite. Let's roll along. If there's any questions in the chat, just holler because I can't actually see it. And then here, there's a couple other settings. We talked about the app log earlier. OttoFMS has the ability to like filter which IP addresses can access it for security. Not going to dive too much into that. These like backup these deployment backup and build settings. This is a primarily a space saving thing. So when you run a deployment, we'll talk a little bit about this in a second, but when you run a deployment, before it installs the new files, it creates a backup of your existing files. So that if something horribly breaks, you can really quickly restore and like undo your deployment. There's actually in the deployment, there's an undo button that will restore all of your backups from before they were installed. So you can go back to where you were. But obviously those backups can get big if you have big files. So if you're doing like 3 deployments in a row on a 30 gig file, you have 90 gigs of backups then. So there are these settings for managing how many of those there are and how many builds to keep. We'll talk about builds in a second as well. This remove file deletion settings is new and does not exist in the current released version, but is exciting. And essentially, you can set a number of days here, and any files in your removed by FMS folders that are older than that number of days will be automatically deleted. So if you deleted a file and you want to say like anything older than 90 days, just remove it because I don't care about it anymore. Every day, Otto will check and it'll say, oh, that one's now 91 days old, be gone. And it'll kind of do that cleanup for you and clean up some folder structure in there so that you don't accidentally like delete 3 different files that are 30 gigs that all have slightly different names, and you go in there and suddenly you have 90 gigs of removed by FMS that you don't care about anymore because you were just renaming a file a couple times, right? So that's pretty neat. That's coming out next week. And then down here, there's like deactivating your license and restarting Otto, and there's some basic server information. So, but that covers the OttoFMS console. Are there any questions? I know we're kind of running pretty quick, but we do have even more to get to. We haven't even gotten to the really cool stuff yet.
Yeah, and you guys are fine. Like we've still got almost another hour.
Okay, cool.
It's all yours.
I can run to the cool. Yeah. I guess we kind of have the Q&A meshed in here. So feel free to stop me with any questions you have as well. So we're gonna jump really quickly into OttoDeploy. This is OttoDeploy. Everything that I'm showing you has a light mode as well. I just always use dark mode, so that's what I'm showing it to you as. OttoDeploy, you'll notice, looks very similar to OttoFMS. This is a FileMaker application installed on the server that we're looking at, my dev server. Actually, this is not on my dev server. I think this is on my demo prod server, but this is a new installation of OttoDeploy. It's very fresh. The only thing I've done to it is I've added my servers here. You'll see these 3 servers, my dev, staging, and prod server on OttoFMS 4.8. And you can quickly access the console and the admin console and everything from here. Adding a new server is as easy as entering a URL and entering an API key for it. That'd be an admin API key. And then you can do all of the things in OttoDeploy. And OttoDeploy is basically a fancy JSON builder. That's the nice way to say it. So everything that OttoDeploy does, you can do with the OttoFMS developer API, but the JSON that gets sent to the developer API gets very complex. So we have OttoDeploy to kind of build it for you. So we're going to do a simple dev to prod deployment just to show off.
Can I just stop right there? Does anybody notice anything different about this FileMaker file? Anybody want to know? I mean, this is a FileMaker file. Does the UI look different? Show some of the other effects.
Oh yeah, so it has the same Command K thing.
Look at the blur on the background. You can also show dark mode and light mode.
Oh yeah, so you can switch to light mode, which is a little bit blinding when you're looking at dark mode.
So this is a FileMaker panel. This is a FileMaker file.
Yeah,
there's a FileMaker layout you are looking at.
We promise it's FileMaker.
Yeah.
Can you go into layout mode? Go into layout mode.
Definitely fools me. Like, how are they doing
the right
this?
menus?
Oh yeah, we turn off layout mode by default, but yeah, it's there. There it is.
There's your layout. Okay, you can go back. Sorry, I didn't interrupt, but I just wanted to point out that what's so cool about this is a FileMaker file, but the user interface is entirely built with web technology.
Yeah,
we could probably go on a whole nother tangent on this, but it also
we could do a whole another 2 hours on
that we can update it. It auto updates itself.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you probably can't demo that easily, Kyle. But
no. But so this is the script. There's really not many scripts in here, but there's like an install web update script. And so most of the updates to AutoDeploy are just to the web code that's running in the web viewer. We've had one instance where we actually had to update the FileMaker file. But when you update the web code, it just pulls down a new copy of the HTML and puts it into the script into the file, and then it's updated.
So it's a one-click update. It says, "Do you want to update?"
click.
Yes, I do.
Yeah. So very easy. Auto
All
updating
right, let's get a
application.
deployment. Let's get a deployment going here. I just wanted to cue people into and really make the point, because you can forget, but this is FileMaker.
Can I say one more before you run a deployment? We've already been talking for over an hour about all the things that Otto can do. So even if you don't have two servers, or even if you think you'll never use deployments, I hope you've already seen that Otto is about way more than that. We talked about deployments being a flagship feature, but lots of use cases.
Yeah, you can do way more. So this is so deployments can get very complex. I will start by saying that. We're going to start with a really easy one, because it's the simple use case where you want to send a file from your dev server to your prod server, right? Or you have a file on, you have a file one place that you need to send somewhere else, or you have a set of dev files that you need to migrate with your production files, keep your production data, but have the new dev file in place. So this has like a title for your deployment. You can add files, and then you set up some default file options. So you just put in your username and passwords. If I had encryption keys, I'd put them in here. You can make some decisions here about arguments you pass into the migration tool. So if you want to use your accounts from your destination or from your source, so if you need to like override your accounts or override your value lists or something, you can rebuild indices and reevaluate calculations. And then when you're installing files, you can select which folder to put them in as part of this process. We just put them in the default folder. And you'll see here, there's a few operations you can do. So AutoDeploy, when you select your servers, it gets the list of files from both of your servers and kind of guides you a little bit. So this install or replace option will dynamically choose whether you're going to replace a file in the destination or install a new file. Whereas migrate is only available for files that already exist, because you can't migrate into a non-existent file. And it will create a clone on the destination and then send it along and then migrate the data into the new clone, or create a clone on the source, sorry. You can optionally close more files, and you can optionally run a post-deployment script in one of these files. So you can select a file to run it in, and I'll say, give me the test API file. Here's its username and password. Run the script called auto run script. And you can pass in some parameters, and you can give it a timeout. And optionally, you can like revert the entire deployment on script error. This has some fancy functionality that lets you you could run, like after you run your deployment, you could run tests, and if the tests fail, you could undo the whole deployment so that you don't break anything. You could like attempt to do some data migration. If the data migration fails, you need to like rewrite your script to make it work. You don't want to have it broken in production, so you can revert it. Bunch of cool stuff you can do with post-deployment scripts. They're also useful. So like if you have some data that changes, so if you have if for example, in your database, you have like a name field that you've decided to split out into a first name and last name field, when you do your deployment, that doesn't automatically happen. So you would need to, after the deployment is finished, run a post-deployment script that says, hey, take my name field, split it on the space, put it in these two other fields. And you can do that all with the post-deployment script. Very cool thing. But we'll run a simple one really quick. So this is all the information I need. If I needed to, these are the default options, as you can see. It says default and everything. If I needed to do something, if I wanted to test API 1, if I wanted to send that a different place, I could send that to the additional folder 1 instead.
Maybe it has a different password on it or something.
Yeah, maybe it has a different password. Maybe I'm sending it somewhere else. Maybe there's one specific file I want to reevaluate the calcs on, anything like that. And then really quickly, the reason that we have this is that for this simple 3-file migration, the JSON is very big. So that's the reason AutoDeploy exists, is because we don't want to subject you all to doing this yourself. You can. I do it sometimes. It's not the best, but you can. So usually what happens is I come into AutoDeploy and I build my deployment, and then I come in here and I copy it, because you can just copy it right here, and then I build whatever API thing I need. So you can kick off all these deployments outside of AutoDeploy.
This is how you can build custom scripts. If you don't like OttoDeploy or you need something that OttoDeploy can't handle, you can use that JSON to write your own API calls to Otto.
Right.
And do whatever
Or
you
if you
need.
have like a application that you want to auto update, for example, you could generate the JSON, and then in your application, when someone clicks a button that says update this application, you could kick off an OttoFMS deployment.
Yep.
Which is how OttoDeploy updates itself. When you update the schema, at least. So, but we will review and deploy. So this will pop up a little review screen. You'll see here I'm installing these two files. I'm going to migrate test API. You'll see I can look at all of the stuff I've decided to choose. I haven't made a post-deployment script or anything, so it's going to be very not bored, but not exciting. I'm doing a just-in-time build, which we'll talk about in a second. But we'll kick this off. You'll see there, I also could have scheduled it. So deployments can be scheduled for later. You can say, run this deployment at 1 a.m. And then when the files close, you won't have to have anybody annoyed that their files are closing. And you'll see here, this is my deployment running. So the deployments do a bunch of things. We'll start. So basically it checks if there's a pre-deployment script to run, it will run it. There's not one. You didn't see the pre-deployment script option because it's in advanced options, which we'll show in a second. So it'll start your deployment, it'll close your files, it'll send a build request to your source server. So a build can be thought of as basically a zip file. It's a zip file of all of your files that you're using in this deployment, or not in another deployment. So you can use build for other things. But this one's going to be a zip of these 3 files of 1 clone and 2 copies. It'll make it into a zip and send it along. You can see the build log here that it makes a backup and it moves it to the outbox, and then it adds it to the zip, and then it makes another backup, and et cetera, et cetera. And then it finishes the zip and it sends it along. That was a 48-second deployment, and most of the time was running this build. So if you can make builds much faster than this too. But you can see here it ran my build, it sent my build to this destination server, it unzipped it, it ran my migration of the test API file, which took, I don't know, 3 seconds, maybe 2 seconds. It's a very small file. It checked for existing files. For the existing files, it backed them up, and then it installed the new files. Once it was installed, it deleted my build from the source and it opened everything. And now these files are here. So this file did not exist on this server, and now it does. It took me a minute and a half. And doesn't have any records, so it's angry at me. But
we had a quick question about does this process migrate the external data folder? And if that's talking about container data, I believe that is no, unless I'm
external container data comes out next week.
Okay, so that's later.
And for migrations, it doesn't, because you presumably would want the external container data from your destination always.
Right.
If you're doing a migration. So, but for installs and replacements, OttoFMS 4.8.0, which is releasing next week sometime, will handle external container data. And you will see a button for that in a second. So
please understand that because we have customers who have 100 gigabytes or more, terabytes of external container data, that's not probably going to be feasible. Again, we're dealing with that constraints of networks and resources that are available on the server to do these things. If you have that much data and you want to be able to do those kinds of things, you are going to need a massive server, and you're going to need a tremendous amount of memory and network to be able to do that in any kind of meaningful time.
Right.
I say that because people, I mean, I think I take it as flattery, is that we try to make this stuff so easy that people just think, oh yeah, they could just send the container data along. Well, yes, but again, lots of bits, lots of data takes a lot of time. In fact, Amazon has a service. Amazon can host so much data that sometimes if people want to move their data from one data center to another in AWS, the fastest way to do that is to use their service that actually uses semi-trucks to move hard drives from one data center to another, because the network can't do it as fast as a semi-truck.
That's pretty funny.
Right. So just please remember that. I just hate to, I know we're going to get a bunch of people who try to move like a terabyte of data. I'm like, it's taking all week. Well,
it's
yeah.
taking so long.
So yes, go on.
Yeah. So that was the simple case. And it was, it's a painless experience. In simple case, you say, take these files, put them over there. Here's my passwords. Here's my migration options. Maybe I want to run a script, something like that. But we told you that we could do fancy stuff. So let's show you some fancy stuff. So there is a button up here that says use advanced options. You can turn this on by default, but by default it is turned off. There's a setting in the settings menu to just like automatically use advanced options for everything. But advanced options. So deployments are technically actually a set of subdeployments. So you can add multiple of them. Advanced options let you do that. So you can basically add multiple steps. Each subdeployment is atomic. So if something fails in your subdeployment, those files won't be installed or will be reverted if they have been installed and then something fails. So this is great for like a multi-tenant case. If you have, 4 customers on the same server who all have a set of the same 5 files with slightly different file names, you can run 4 subdeployments that send each of those 5 files. And if one of your customers' migrations fails, it won't fail for everybody. And you can do like specific decision making based on customer. So if you need to like run a different script per customer, or you need to pass a different parameter into your post-deployment script or something along those lines, you can do all of that stuff. The other thing you can do is that you can do deployments between multiple servers more easily. So you always have to have, in a single deployment, you have to have the same destination, but you can have multiple sources. So the use case for that is like, if let's add a couple things. So if I want to add like we'll actually change my destination here to my staging server. So we have a bunch of docs about different like deployment paradigms. But the kind of the common one that we get a lot is the staging refresh. So essentially you want to take the data that's in your production file, put it on your staging server, and then test it with your new code in your development file, right? And you could presumably somehow, not even somehow, there's a way to do that too, the refresh dev pattern, but you could send your production file back to your development server and like do a migration there, or you could like do 2 different deployments that like move your production files back to your staging server and then move your dev files over. But alternatively, you can use an alternate source. So I can say here, use my prod environment, add this set of files, get these 3 files we just did. I want to install or replace these because I'm getting a copy of them. So I'm pulling down a copy of my production files, and then Space is in my way. And then you get these same files, which are these 3, and you say, instead of that, do a migration. Okay, that's going to get upset at me because those don't actually exist on this server yet, but presumably if they did, you could just do a migration there. And this would let you pull your files down from production and then do a migration of your dev files. It would probably take a couple minutes because these are pretty small files. If they're bigger, it obviously takes longer, and due to network constraints and time constraints on the migrations. But that lets you like pretty quickly set up a staging environment that you can run tests on your development code in your production data, without having to worry about moving all those files yourself or taking down any, like your production files don't have to go down for this. It makes a copy of them using the FileMaker backups. So there's some impact on the server, but really it's not going to impact your customers very much.
So this would be the process so I could set up that secondary server?
So this would be, so the secondary server would be more like the first one where you just send over a copy, right? You basically take all your files, toss them over to the other server. This copies over all the data. If you were doing an install or replace, this takes all your files and sends them over. So I think this would be what you wanted to do for the setup of that server, because you basically just need to copy all your files over, right?
Yeah, all the data and all the application both. So the whole file needs to come over.
Right. Yeah. So this is what you would do: is you just say, go from this source to this destination, move all these files. Here's their passwords.
Along with 25 gig of container data.
Oh, goody.
Well, the 2 servers right now are 6 inches apart on a gig Ethernet connection.
So. Oh, well, that's pretty good. Yeah.
It's still going to take a while. Gig Ethernet.
It'll still take a bit.
Yeah. Like the one of the things somebody was asking me in the chat about Mac Minis. Mac Minis are pretty great FileMaker servers, but you have to go up a little bit to get the 10 gig Ethernet. because most Apple's computers come with a 1 gig Ethernet, and it really actually matters, the 10 gigs versus 1 gigs. So if you can get 10 gig Ethernet, it'll make a difference for those kinds of things very dramatically, 10 times faster.
One thing that Mac OS does support, though, is you can put multiple Ethernet interfaces into one and bond them together, and that's natively supported in the network settings.
Yeah. Can you do that with a Mac Mini? It only has one Ethernet port, though, right?
Right. You'd have to get another Ethernet connector, but
yeah,
put them in the USB-C or whatever. But yeah, you can bond 3 or 4 of them together.
I think I don't know what maybe the Mac Mini Pro, but at some level the Mac Minis can come with 10 gigabyte Ethernet, which is what I would go with if I was getting a production FileMaker server in house. I would do a Mac Mini with a 10 gig Ethernet.
Even the base model supports a 10 gig option for $100.
Well, it's $100. Oh, it's an option. Oh, even better. Fantastic.
Cool. Yeah, Taylor.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
Hi, Alessandro speaking.
Hey, Alessandro.
I agree totally about the Mac Mini because it's more than 5 years that we use Mac Mini with 10 gigabit and a lot of RAM. But remember that if you don't put in the right server farm that allow you to have the right connection, all the hardware, all the money, all what your investment doesn't work properly. And we have tried last year to move on the server farm they're using right now to another one that is in Atlanta. So I only give, if you want, I can give you what we use if you allow me, but I don't know if you allow me. But and after 2 days of test, we come back in what we actually have because there is night and day. So if you want to put, like we say, the strawberry on the cake, but you don't have the right cake, sometimes it's better to have the cake and not the strawberry. They have the strawberry without the cake. Okay. Sorry, if I say that.
No,
that's okay.
I like that analogy.
So the what we use right now is Mac Stadium. Okay.
Yeah, Mac Stadium's good, but you do have to make sure you get a 10 gig connection.
Yeah, we have.
Yeah.
We have also in Dublin, in our server, and that we have in Dublin, we have the 10 gigabit. And there is it's night and day.
Yeah, it's critical. So we use Mac Stadium. So our Ottomatic Cloud, we don't resell Mac Minis. We do Linux and Windows in our cloud. And the main reason for that is that Mac Mini hosting is Mac hosting is very challenging to do at scale, and Mac Stadium does a very good job, and we can't really compete with that. So if people want to run Mac Minis in the cloud, Mac Stadium is the best to do that for sure.
Yeah, but an example, last week we have a problem that probably some client in the same rack that we have our Mac Mini, I don't know what they have installed. And for some reason, the performance of our server go down drastically and the webhook stop working. There is something like this. After 2 days of test, the Mac Mini guy say everything is okay. We asked to move our Mac Mini to another rack and all the problems solved. So you need to also control the performance and something else. It's not automatically controlled. You need to have your perception, what is going good or going down. But Mac Mini is great.
Yeah, Mac Stadium also does. You can run two. You can run 2 copies of Mac OS on any Mac. It's allowed via the license to do that. You can't do more than 2. So you can run 2 servers on a very large Mac, which also can be helpful. You can put your dev and production server on the same server, but split it with a Mac VM. And Mac Mini can do that for you as well. I'm sorry, Mac Stadium has that.
They have an all-class service, something like this.
Yeah.
But we prefer to have dedicated Mac Mini and use more efficiency than have virtual machine. Depend on the project. Sorry to interrupt.
That's
no
okay.
worries. I'm going to quickly talk about a couple of the advanced features in here, and then we'll talk about builds for a quick second, and then I want to show you all the Cloud Console because that's really the big thing. So you can customize a bunch of options about your deployments. You can customize build options. You can choose to close files, and you can change the compression level and the memory level of your zip files. And there's a bunch of customization you can do here. You can do the same closing of additional files we talked about earlier. You can choose when your files close. You can run a pre or post deployment script. You can choose not to open files at the end of deployments. You can send Slack notifications for deployments. So you can set up a Slack channel to basically receive notifications that say, hey, this deployment has started. Hey, this deployment is finished. Oh, this failed. So you can get updates about things. If you like schedule a deployment, this is really useful to get notification of when it's actually happening. You can also customize the message to the user and also change the concurrency settings. So this lets you basically migrate files in parallel instead of in series, which is the default. So you can migrate and install in parallel, which obviously has a very big performance impact on your server. We do like an estimation here that it's like about 2.5 gigs of RAM per concurrent migration. That can be bigger than that, so just be very careful with that setting. And then you can I don't know, there's a bunch of stuff in this UI that's kind of cool. You can move sub-deployments up and down. You can do you can build from an offsite location, and you can select different offsites to do all of this stuff from. And you can you can publish builds up to offsite locations and then deploy back down from them. You can use
I should
URL
say something
to
quickly
deploy
about,
from.
I'm not sure if this got said, I may
Yeah.
have missed it, but one of the differences between Otto 3 and OttoFMS is builds are separated out. So by default, we run them kind of together in that first basic one that we did. But really, especially if you're doing more advanced cases, you want to run builds probably ahead of time, especially if you've got versions you're going to ship to customers. You're going to want to make a build for your version, and then you're going to want to use that same build for maybe deploying to multiple customers. And so that's why we have this builds as a separate thing that you can do. And then once you have a build, there's various ways of moving it to the servers you want to move it to, and or just do a deployment from a build that's hosted in the cloud. So it gives you, again, it's for that use case of multi-tenancy or where you're shipping the same version of files to multiple customers. You want to run that build ahead of time.
Yeah. And the builds, the builds, you can think of them as basically a snapshot of your files. So they're a picture of your files at a point in time. So they're useful, for if you need to send the same set of files to multiple places, like Todd was saying. They're also really useful if you are only allowed to deploy at certain times. So say you're working with a customer and they only let you deploy on like Friday nights at 11:30, right? If you finish your version on Tuesday, you don't really want to just sit around for the next 3 days, right? Well, you might, but your customer probably doesn't want you to sit around for the next 3 days. So you can create a build of your files, and it will say, here are those files at that point in time. And then you can use those files to perform migrations, depending on if you choose a copy or a clone here. So that way you can continue doing development for the rest of the week while having your stable development copy that you made on Tuesday available to do that migration on Friday, which is a really nice kind of thing that they let you do. They also, as you can see here, have a bunch of options. So you can run a script before your build if you need to change any data in copies, or if you need to update anything. You can set it to override. You can set it to close files during the build. So if you're making a copy, it will just close the files and copy them directly instead of using a FileMaker backup, which is significantly faster. So that's pretty nice if you're on a development server where you can just close the builds. But if you can't close the files, obviously you wouldn't want to do that. And then the thing Todd was talking about getting it places is that you can publish builds. So there's a variety of places you can publish them. Right. Well, I guess it's 3 right now. So you can do the inbox, the HTTP folder, or an offset location. The inbox just sends it to another server where the other server can use it. So if you have to have a really fast deployment, so say you have a production solution that gets used 24/7 and it can only have very short downtimes, and you want to be able to plan exactly when that downtime is, you can send this build to that server ahead of time so that you don't have to wait for any of the build fetching during the deployment. And you can just select it in the inbox and say, yep, use this one. And it will just really quickly use that build without having to do any fetching. It'll just unzip it and use it without having to do anything extra. And you can select all the servers you have in here, all that stuff. The HTTP folder lets you basically use the HTTP folder on this server as a build from URL so that you can use like a public URL for it, which is pretty interesting. And then you can send it to an offsite location. So you saw earlier in the deployment how you could deploy from an offsite location. This is how you get a build to an offsite location. That's pretty, I don't know, those are all pretty advanced use cases, but all supported via OttoDeploy. And then you can change the compression and memory level, and you can do the same thing we talked about earlier where you can copy the JSON if you need to do some sort of custom build flow. So, I mean, that covers the basics of OttoDeploy. And I guess, are there any questions about this before we hop into some of like the kind of, we call them superpowers, but what's up, Ron?
I had a couple of questions. One's a pretty simple one, and I think I know the answer, but running OttoDeploy doesn't matter whether you're doing it from your development server or your production server, correct? You can, whichever.
Yeah.
It's wherever.
Yeah, the file doesn't have to be hosted.
Yeah, you can have it locally on your computer. There's only one situation in which it matters, which is that if your production server is behind a firewall, you should probably have OttoDeploy on that server so that it can properly communicate.
Okay. The other question I had to do with a specific scenario. I have a file that's on my development server. I've got 2 copies of that same file on my production server with different names, different extensions for the name. I was recently trying to set up a deployment where I can migrate, and I couldn't figure out how to do that particular scenario.
Yeah. So if you do like let's see, we do dev, we do prod. I turn this on to advanced options because we'll need those. Move that so I can click things, and we'll do it with this test API file. So when you're in here with this test API file, there's this button on the far right.
Oh, there's the duplicate.
Have another destination, same source.
Advanced options. That's often the answer is if you ever need something, try advanced options.
Yeah, so that's why I missed
and
it.
Then,
I didn't see it in advance.
Yeah, it's a bit of a hidden little button too, but yes, that is how you would do it. Is you basically just duplicate it, uses the same source file, and does it to 2 things. And then you have to use the same operation for it because you have to either get a clone or a copy. You can't get both. So
that's fantastic.
Yeah. But no, that one's pretty cool.
Steven has a question, it looks like.
Okay.
Yes. What versions, Todd, of FileMaker Server, FileMaker Pro, and which operating systems does this support?
So it's FileMaker 19 and above, and any operating system that supports that version. However, FileMaker 19 is about to go end of life in 2 weeks. And we will stop supporting it officially sometime thereafter. So how many people are still running 19 servers, FileMaker 19 servers? Got one person waving. No, one person. We have a sale we're about to announce. You can come and move all your files to all your servers to Ottomatic, and we'll give you 20% off your first year of a server at Ottomatic. So if you need a reason to move to the cloud, we'll give you one, and you can upgrade to the latest version of FileMaker. You can give it up. You can put your files in the cloud, and you get 20% off the cost of that server for the first year. So, yay.
There are also some other features that are only supported with newer versions.
That's right. Yeah, like the FileMaker, the data migration tool is only the stuff that not data migration, the stuff that uses the developer tool is only 21, I think.
Yeah,
it was 20.3.
You should,
I think it's 20.3.
Whatever. Yeah, it's 20.3. Yeah, I think.
But you want to stay updated if you can, for sure.
Yeah, I guess that's right. It's 20 is when that shifted. I don't think there's anything that's relying on 21.1, although
no,
I don't think there is.
Yeah, the only things that we've shown today that you couldn't use on a FileMaker 19.6 server would be the renaming with the developer tool and the encrypting and decrypting and the saving as an XML.
Yeah. So we're actually, especially because FileMaker Server prior to 19.4, any version is critically insecure, and we will we have a few hosting customers that are still on it, and we're basically going to say, we're just going to say, if you want to continue to host here, you have to sign a waiver absolving us of all responsibility, and you have to pay us $50 a month for every server, 18 server or 19.2 server that you want to keep running, because they are critically insecure and you should not be running them. So if you refused and you're running on our platform, you will have to wait. You'll have to absolve us of all responsibility and pay us extra money. So there you go. So yeah, Stephen, we're going to force people to move as quickly as we can. And it's obviously important that they do that.
Yeah, this one's going to be migrating off that in January. So it'll be the last one of my dozen or so servers that are on an old version.
Yeah. Well, now you got a reason to, if you want to move into the cloud, you got a reason to do it before that. And so our sale is going to start probably tomorrow, and it'll run through December 15th.
This is in next year's budget cycle, so it's not going to happen that time.
Yeah, I get you. I would really want, I think the most underappreciated and underused feature of the entire platform is the Ottomatic Cloud Console. And we don't have a lot of time. So I really would love to be able to show that to people, because it is the thing that if you're managing multiple servers, if you're a developer with multiple customers and you're managing multiple servers, and again, we have so far not shown you anything that costs you any money from us.
And I'm not going to show you anything that costs you any money.
We're not going to show you anything that costs us any money from us. So this, again, is also free to use.
Yeah, so we've shown you like the basic AutoFMS features, right? We've shown you deployments, we've shown you builds, we've shown you offsites. AutoFMS, like the thing we like to say is that it gives your server superpowers. The things we've shown you are like cool. They're not the superpowers we're talking about. So we build a lot of stuff on top of AutoFMS, and the Cloud Console is kind of the big one. So AutoFMS, obviously, you do a single server management. You go to your server /autos, and it takes you to the console. You can manage all your files. You can do all that stuff. If you need to do something with another server, you open it up with a tab. You go to that server. You go to /auto. You do file management there, et cetera, et cetera. If you need to set up a deployment, you open up OttoDeploy, and you go and you set up your deployment, all that thing. The Ottomatic Cloud Console is our multi-server management platform. If you have automatic servers hosted with us, they are on here. The servers I'm showing you now are automatic servers, but if I untick this little favorites thing, you'll see here this BirdPath server. This is a
it's actually Mac Stadium.
It's a Mac Stadium, but it is an on-prem server, right? This is not an automatic server.
Or it's hosted
I should say on-prem, just in the fact that it's not on our cloud.
Yes, it's
automatic. It could be on anybody's cloud that can run OttoFMS.
Yeah. So as long as the server is running AutoFMS, you can connect it. That's the basics. Any version of AutoFMS, although if you're going to install AutoFMS, you should install the newest version. And yeah, so this does a lot of things that the AutoFMS console does, as well as some extra stuff. So this is just like a nice table. So you can sort everything by versions. You get organizations, which are basically a group of users and billing information. You don't have to add billing information if you're not using any of the paid features of this. These are all the same organization because I filtered to this organization, but you can see like I'm in the Proof+Geist organization, which has its own giant set of servers. You can sort by versions, you can get a location, you can get operating system, disk, RAM. I have the URL one hidden because it's kind of built into this one, but there's also a very fancy grid view of this, which will show you some like current stats for your server. So it'll show you, this is like basically the same stuff you get on the admin console with CPU usage and memory usage and all that kind of thing. Current disk space in use. And this is a pretty basic view of this, but we have a more extensive view as well. And you can easily get to the AutoFMS console and the FileMaker admin console from right here. You can do favorites. You can do a health check on your server. So if you're having a problem with your server, you can run this little health check and it'll like check your license and it'll check that it can connect and it'll check that Otto is good. It'll shoot confetti in the air if everything works. So some very cool like troubleshooting stuff there. So lots of kind of interesting stuff baked in here. The server dashboard is like the big one powered by Otto. So you'll see here, this is like really a lot of the information I need about my server. So this is, my demo dev server. This is all the databases I have hosted. You can see here I have 2 different disks mounted on this server, which OttoFMS can detect and then give you stats for both of them and tell you what they're used for. So like my database folders are all on this disk, but my backup location is on this disk, and I can see different disk sizes based on different disks. That's all powered by OttoFMS. There's no other way to do that really without like getting in the file system.
Yeah, the admin console doesn't show it, and the admin API doesn't provide it. So if you have multiple disks, you'll see them here.
Yeah.
Only place you'll see them.
You can see some stats. This card, if you're on a version before 21.1, has all of your data API statistics. If you're on 21.1 or later, they don't matter anymore. So it just has the ability to turn on and off the data API and the OData API. And then for automatic servers, it gives you some details about what your server is set up like.
Yeah, they turned off metering in the UI for data API. So now we can just quickly toggle it.
You can just quickly toggle it. And you can quickly toggle it before that version too. But
yes.
And then you'll see a lot of the same things that you saw in the OttoFMS console here. So we have a databases tab, we have a clients tab, you can manage your services, you can look at your logs, you can browse files, but you can do it for all of your servers in the same place instead of having 1 tab per server or opening up 3 different windows or whatever. There's also, because we have multiple servers on here, some very fun things that you can do. This one got added like last week, I think, which is that there's a send to another server button. And I can say, oh yeah, send this to my Acme Stage server. It'll take these 2 files, get a list of files from my Acme Stage server, say, oh, these are going to be file installs. I can select that I want to put it in the test subfolder, click send. This has kicked off a deployment to send these files. So these files, it's now creating a build, it's running a deployment, all the stuff that we did in OttoDeploy earlier, but instead of having to go in, select my 2 servers and set up all my credentials and yada, 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 I just say, take these files, put them over there, go. And it's doing it, right? It's going to run this build. It'll take, 30 seconds. It'll send the files across. It'll probably take less than a minute to do the whole file set. And this doesn't support migrations because they have a lot of other settings that you'd have to do, but it's a very easy, very simple, send my files over there kind of situation. So, and this will show you everything that runs. It'll say, oh, these installed. We deleted the build and now it's done. It's going to say it's done in a second. Yeah, there it's done. So that took 40 seconds to send those 2 files. And it was like the easiest thing I've done all day. So that's kind of the power that we have in the cloud consoles, that we can do things like that.
Well, it's more than just that, if I can interject a minute. It's remember, it's not just that all these servers are living in 1 tab. It's that you don't have to, you can give access to a team member, for example, without them having the credentials also.
Yeah.
Right? There's a lot more power in that regard, and there's more access control built into this. But that's the simple thing. When I need to launch a file for any client I'm working on, I come here. And and that little star button that you see within files or servers are favorites that you can then search from the command K bar or that little rocket launcher to just launch a file on any server because you favorited it.
No, I just launched the Heartbeat API. Yeah. And because of the Automatic Cloud Console's ability to do favorites, Eric has written a very nice Raycast extension that can use them. So if you're using a Mac and you have Raycast installed, you can very quickly launch favorites and open up the Cloud Console and open up a specific server and all this kind of stuff with like a quick option space thing on a Mac. So there's a lot of very cool things baked in here. And obviously the clients and service management is nice for being able to do that for like multiple servers alongside each other. And this is literally the exact same file manager. It's running the same code, even almost the same code. And then there's some other settings. There's some like OCC specific settings. You can update some of the auto settings from here. All that kind of stuff. There's some settings specific to automatic servers, which you'll see here, like the hard reboot and the custom domain and things like that. But yeah, so that's kind of the servers in here is the big thing. So these are totally free. Like you can add as many on-prem servers as many non-automatic servers as you want for completely free. Like we charge you nothing. There's no like credit card you have to put in. There's no Like you have to create an account. That's pretty much it.
And they just have to be running
So,
Otto, and
and
they
then
have to
like
be
Eric said, you can
accessible.
invite people. So there's
Yeah.
right. They have to be open to the internet. Like they have to be accessible via the internet, I guess, not open to it. But as long as you can hit it from the internet without a VPN or something, you can connect it here and use all of the cool features of OCC. There's also some other stuff in here. There's some cool tools. There's single sign-on and cloud storage are services that we offer. So you can get easy single sign-on through us. You can get simple S3 compatible cloud storage through us that will really easily integrates with AutoFMS. But the tools tab, these are completely free, kind of cool little tools you can use. So if you need to build an FMP URL to launch a file or build an HTTPS URL, you can use this, and you can like pre-fill credentials. You can run a script when you open the file using this. So if I run like a test script and I want to use on my Acme dev server and I want to select this test API file and I want to run it with a script name of Kyle, then it just builds this whole FTP URL for me. I can open it right now. I'll run the script. I can copy it and paste it somewhere. So if I want to give somebody a button that will do something in a file in a different system, or like open up a file and run a script, so they go to a specific place, you can do that through here. The mod log like shows you modifications, and the FMSVG it will pre-format SVG files for you to use with FileMaker. So there's like some cool stuff built into here. We talked about favorites. You can favorite servers, you can favorite files, you can favorite URLs that you build in the URL builder and quickly launch them from the Cloud Console or Raycast. There's organizations which you can use to like add other members to your stuff. So like this Acme organization has a bunch of people in it. And all of these people have access to these servers, can manage the files on the servers without having the like admin credentials to that server and being able to get into the admin console. So, I mean, they could, like I have access to all these servers, but I don't need to, right? So
let's wind down the show here because there's so much.
There's not much time
going forever. So we don't have a lot of time left, but I'm curious if anybody has any reactions or questions. And also, if you have more questions and you think of them later, a good place is the community, which is community.automatic.cloud. And you can sign up there and ask questions there, and we'll answer, or somebody else will answer. It's a really great community. Lots of people help, and it's kind of becoming a place where people who are using the Automatic platform can just, gather and build on it and make it better. So what do you think? Was it more than you expected?
I think I'm going to have to watch this video back and hopefully be able to slow it down because we've covered so much and so quickly.
I will also say there are a variety of videos we've posted other places in the docs, in the blog. We have a video where Todd and Martha and I are going to go through the Cloud Console in much more depth to talk about things there. The AutoFMS docs have lots of information about specific deployment patterns that you might want to do, or like they go really deep into the settings and like everything you can do with it. There are guides on setting up webhooks and setting up data API proxy and all that kind of stuff. So the docs and the community and in the blog, I guess, has some good stuff in it too. But those are the places you should go. And also, if you need any help, just ask a question in the community. We're happy to answer.
I also think it's amazing that it's free. And it was funny because when I went at Pause on Error, when I was talking to you guys down there, it was like I almost felt like I had to whisper, do you mean I don't have to pay for Otto anymore? Is that like, it was so amazing to find out that like, yeah, we're going to just give it to you for free now. So
it's really the right model. I mean, don't get me wrong. We are capitalists and we hope that you will pay us money at some point, but just to get people to this level of thinking about, what you can do with a server and what you can do with DevOps and what you can do with integrations. There just was no way to tell people, yes, but to explore this, you have to pay, right? But we also know, we've already seen it, that what it tends to happen is that people will, they'll get into situations, they'll get into customers or particular accounts or solutions where they need really good servers in the cloud. And our servers are the best. and we are convinced of that. The other thing about our servers is we're the only provider that will give you bare metal servers. I mean, you can go, well, Mac Stadium, but then you're not running on a FileMaker specific platform. You're running on an Apple, which you have to maintain yourself. But in terms of like Windows and Linux servers, we'll give you bare metal servers. And if you have a big WebDirect system, WebDirect does not run in VMs very well. It runs on bare metal servers. If you have a big WebDirect system, you need a bare metal server. You can't do it in a VM. And so we can provide you with bare metal servers. We can provide you with extra security measures. We can provide you the kinds of things that you need to run big projects. And typically those big projects have bigger budgets, and you can afford to pay the extra money that comes down to. But you also have a lot of small customers, and you can't burden them with the costs of the expensive stuff just to get them to be able to make your lives easier by having webhooks, right? Like,
Right.
You just want that to be easy. So that's why that stuff is free. And also we get a lot of benefits from having a lot of people running OttoFMS. Like I said, we can tell you that, last month there were 7,000 or whatever it was, 8,000 FileMaker files that were migrated successfully on this platform. The more people we get on this platform, the better the platform gets, because it's more tested, it's more edge cases, or more of that stuff just gets worked out. So there's a value to us by getting you to use this stuff, even if we don't charge you for it. We make it better. And eventually, we think that many of you will come to us with a problem that we are the only ones on the planet that can solve. And that's what we want to charge you for, is that. Not for your little customers who just need, webhooks and QuickBooks integration.
Can I ask you a question about your hosting?
Sure.
I'm a Texas guy here, and
Yeah.
You came out and visited us. We appreciated that. One of the issues we have here in Texas is so much of the hosting is on Amazon, and that's on
Yep.
the East and West Coast. So our latency to Amazon servers is not near as good as anything local, which is why I've been doing FM Cloud here in the DFW area, because they've got servers here. I get latency down to 1 millisecond over the WAN, which is just amazing. But where are your servers?
So we have servers in Dallas.
Okay.
We have more data centers than any other provider by a pretty good margin. We have 32, and we also have some others that we don't list, but we can deploy to for special cases.
So you're in
the problem if you're on AWS, you can put AWS servers in Dallas, but you can't get them bigger than 8 gigabytes, because AWS data center is an edge center. It's not a main data center.
Right,
we have
right.
a full data center in Dallas, which means we can give you a bare metal server in Dallas if you need to. And so that's the thing. And so the latencies, if you're there, are very good. We're also going to be offering next quarter an accelerated network, which means that latency will matter less, because we're going to be able to give you a compressed accelerated network from your server to wherever your customers happen to be, which is going to lower that latency even more. Matters a lot. It can matter a lot for WebDirect. One of the nice things about WebDirect is that the latency tends to be better for, around, farther. You can get farther away, but it can be flaky. Some customers, some particular users may not have a great internet connection, and they get disconnected all the time. They have to re-log in, which is a pain. So our accelerated network just basically removes that problem. And so that's coming next year. And it's good. It improves WebDirect quite a bit. It also improves FileMaker performance as well. And that will take care of some of those situations as well. But we have Dallas, and you can go automatic.cloud. You can look for our data centers and see the map where they are around the world.
I put the map in the chat.
Right.
Yeah,
There you go.
I see it. I'm certainly going to look into that for some of my clients, because we've been avoiding all these hosting companies in AWS because it just doesn't work so great in Dallas. So now that I know you guys are here, I appreciate it.
I'll be bold and say, I mean it, that we have the best servers. Now, people will come back and say, well, my server ran better in this particular case. And that's certainly true. But I think just in general, so you mentioned FM Cloud, and what they do really well is they host FileMaker in Docker. And It's actually true that you can get really good performance on a FileMaker server in Docker. However, if that Docker server where all those Dockers all of those servers, all of those Docker containers are deployed is overloaded, you will get terrible performance. Because again, what tends to happen is people will slam a lot of hosting, put a lot of containers on there. And as long as you are one of the few containers on that server, it'll be great. And then someday you show up and now it's not so great. And we have customers who come to us and say, I need consistent performance, always the same. I can't have this shared problem that happens with Docker. That said, we're going to be rolling out some special cases where we do development bundles that include Docker, where you have one bare metal server running 3 Docker instances. And that can actually work really well. And it can provide some interesting performance benefits. But the problem with just getting like a hosting provider that's offering you Docker alone by itself is you're at the mercy of whatever other Docker containers are running on that server. And that's the issue. Sometimes it'll be absolutely fine. Other times it will not. And depending on your scenario, that may matter or that may not.
Do you have a preference?
I had to move off FM Cloud because the mirror sync's not supported. It does it server to server, but the client server mirror sync model is not supported at FM Cloud.
Yeah, I'm not sure why that is. I didn't know that. But yeah, Docker. I mean, we're actually experimenting with Docker a lot because there are some things that we would like to be able to do with it. But until we can absolutely say with certainty what you can expect from the performance for the value, for the dollars that you're paying, we won't do it. And that's really what it comes down to. So like what other people, I know what FM Cloud does, which I think is actually a smart plan, is they will sell you a whole dedicated server and then it's up to you to manage the Dockers that are on there. And if you put too many on there, well, that's your problem, right? And I think that's actually not an unreasonable thing to do, is that, you can get a big bare metal server, put a bunch of Dockers on it, and then you manage the performance of that. And if you put too many, your other people that are on there suffer the consequences, but you can manage it. You can deal with it. The key thing to understand is that Docker servers are going to share those resources. And in some cases, that's great. And in other cases, it's not great. And you just need to understand the trade-offs there.
How about the difference between Mac servers and Linux servers?
Mac servers are great. The problem with Mac servers is not the performance. The problem with Mac servers is they don't integrate well with cloud management tools. So the kind of disaster recovery on Macs is just not as good, because especially Mac minis, the hardware is not great. Like Mac mini hardware, typically what they'll do is they'll have extra Macs running in this. They'll put extra Mac minis running in the same rack. They're just waiting there for the other ones to fail, because they will fail. Those drives and those server components will fail with heavy use. So I would love to build out a Mac data center that we could deploy. Again, it's like when you're offering hosting services, you have to be able to say, here's the service that we provide for this price. And that means certain kinds of backups and disaster recovery and all that stuff. And if we don't think we can do that at a level, where we're just basically at the mercy of a Mac mini server failing, that's not okay, right? But you as an individual person can certainly say, you know what, Mac Stadium's great. I understand the risks. I can put my server in there. And if the server goes sideways, Mac mini will fix it pretty quickly. And that's okay. Like, again, it's understanding that trade-off. If you have Mac minis in your home office, I recommend you get 2. Have 2 Mac minis, or you get like a Mac Studio or something that's a little better hardware class.
Studio's
and that's ready, so you can just do those hot swaps yourself. But in terms of performance for the price, Macs are awesome. The other one is Linux. We can do, and not in the data centers we have listed, but we have a couple other data centers where we do Linux ARM, and Linux ARM is as good in performance-wise as Mac minis. It's just harder to get. The ARM stuff is just challenging to get in cloud. Again, it's not something we can do off our website because we can't always get the ARM servers. They're just harder to get. So that's the trade-offs. It's all trade-offs, you know. Mac Minis are phenomenal, but you have to make sure
Well,
that you are dealing with that stuff.
Okay, the other thing is, well, I'm finally getting my last customer off FM Cloud. I mean, not FM Cloud, Claris Cloud. You know, that has been a real pain in the butt for me
Yep.
over the last few years. I, anyway, I wish they would either do better or get out of the business and leave it to you guys to run it.
Well, tell them you'd rather just, no, I mean, give them the feedback. I think it's reasonable that Claris runs a cloud system, but I don't think it needs to be the best. I think ours is the best. I hope we've proven that in terms of the breadth of features and what's available, just with the free tools that we give you. And then on top of that, we have a fully managed, fully monitored cloud platform that goes above and beyond what certainly Claris Cloud does, and we think anybody else, you know, that's available to you. And there's other cloud providers. We're not the only one. I think you can, like I said, I think we have the best for the most for the widest breadth of FileMaker systems out there. I think you can find particular cases with particular data centers, particular countries where we're not there, or you've got a small FileMaker system and you don't care if it's shared Docker, it's fine. You may be able to get things at a better price somewhere else. We will not be the cheapest, but I can tell you we're also not the most expensive.
Right. Well, price has been rarely a problem for my clients. They're wanting, good, you know, all my clients, these are business production stuff. They're not looking for the cheapest.
Yeah.
They're
The other thing
looking.
I'll say about AWS is unless you're buying the 3-year instances, it's very expensive.
Yes.
It's very expensive to run a FileMaker server on AWS.
I see you have 2 centers in Japan. So
We do.
I've always wanted to know the answer to this, but it's my understanding that the Japan market for FileMaker is pretty great.
It's massive. I last I knew it was like 25% of global sales, something crazy like that. I don't know if that's still true, but
that's up there.
So
Yeah.
Mac was the first one to really support the 3 Japanese alphabets, and so they got really in there hard a long time ago. But that's the main reason. Plus, just they like iPhones and all that.
Yeah.
But they had these 3 hiragana, katakana, and kanji, and they supported the whole thing the right way first.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah.
And that's why, and FileMaker too.
Yes.
Bev's got her hand up. Bev, did you have something?
Yeah, I have to leave, and I wanted to make sure the announcement went out that OttoFM is looking for women to apply for the scholarship, either for this next Engage or actually any of the events, Pause on Air, or trainings that are happening.
Oh, great.
And the deadline is like through the end of December. So if you want to get somebody, pass the word around. I'll give you the link here in chat, and then I gotta leave.
Great.
And thank you, Todd and Kyle and Eric. It was a great presentation, and it's a really exciting product. So thank you.
Absolutely.
It was
Thank you.
Indeed. Thank you.
Yeah.
It's
Thanks,
very
y'all.
impressive.
I've used Otto for years now. And I think the most exciting thing in here is the API stuff.
Yeah.
Everything else is evolutionary, but
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time. Tell all your friends. I know how many I know how many of your next door neighbors use FileMaker. You can just pop on over for all the Christmas holiday parties, and tell them you heard about the best FileMaker hosting, best FileMaker tools. Watch them give you a blank stare.
Yeah.
I will say, if you find any problems with AutoFMS, let us know in the community. If you have anything in your life in FileMaker that makes you annoyed, let us know in the community. It has happened multiple times that someone's like, hey, does AutoFMS have a way to solve this? And we're like, no, but it could. And then it comes out like 2 weeks later. So
Thanks.
if you have anything you wish was easier, let me know. Yeah,
Thanks
thanks.
so much. Appreciate it.
Well,
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
All right,
Take care.
bye.